cabin buzzed with the usual energy of a late afternoon flight out of LAX. Businessmen loosened their ties. Tired parents negotiated with restless toddlers, and the comforting hush of first class settled like a soft blanket. Among the passengers was 19-year-old Barron Trump, tall and reserved, with earbuds tucked into his hoodie and a hardcover biography on his lap. He was flying alone, something he'd gotten used to. The seat beside him remained empty, until the flight attendant whispered to a passenger boarding late, "I'm sorry, Mr. Gibson, first class is completely full." There was a system error. Heads turned. Mel Gibson, Siranun, unmistakable in both presence and poise, gave a nod that said he understood. But Barron, watching quietly from behind his book, stood up without hesitation. "Take mine." "Sir," he said. The assistant tried to intervene, but Barron was already moving toward Coach. Mel looked at him for a second. A long, actor's pause, before shaking his hand and saying, "Not every day someone gives up comfort like that." Barron just smiled, disappeared down the aisle, and wedged himself into a middle seat between a man eating almonds too loudly and a teenage girl scrolling through TikTok. First class didn't miss him, but Mel did. Half an hour in, as the seatbelt sign flickered on and the cabin began to shudder from unexpected turbulence, Barron's calm presence stood in sharp contrast to the chaos brewing around him. The flight attendants were scrambling. Passengers gripped their armrests. Overhead bins rattled like nerves. In 3A, Mel looked back once toward Coach, his thoughts spinning. He had starred in countless scenes like this, but now he wasn't acting. And he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about the kid who gave up his seat. 1 hour into the storm, the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Please stay seated. We're experiencing unusual wind shear." Barron steadied his breath as the girl beside him burst into tears. Her phone had slipped from her hands. Barron retrieved it without a word, handing it back. "It's just air," he said gently. She nodded. He didn't realize how loud his voice wasn't, but the calm in it carried. In the dark hush of first class, Mel pulled out a pen. The back of a menu would have to do, and with each line he scribbled. The idea of a new story began to form. The turbulence didn't ease. If anything, the shaking grew more violent. The plane groaned like an old ship fighting waves of wind. A child cried out. A tray clattered to the floor, and the lights above flickered into an eerie dim. In seat 27B, Barron sat still. His hands were clasped on his lap, white-knuckled but composed. He wasn't scared for himself. He was scanning the rows, watching others, noticing who was panicking, who needed a look, a word, a calm breath to mirror. The salesman to his left was mumbling to himself, the bravado from earlier now replaced by a glaze. Trembling silence. Barron leaned slightly toward him, not to speak, but just to exist in presence. That was sometimes enough. Meanwhile, in first class, Mel had stopped scribbling. The pen rolled off his tray. Something wasn't right. He had flown enough to know turbulence. But this felt angry. There was a pressure in the cabin that made his instincts stir. Not fear, but urgency. He reached for the call button, then pulled his hand back. What was he going to ask? If the plane was falling, if the storm outside could be reasoned with. Instead, he closed his eyes and saw the boy. The tall, polite teenager who had no idea he was being watched. There was something about him, an edge of resolve that reminded Mel of his early days on set. The kind of man you didn't notice until you needed him. The intercom crackled again. This time the voice was less composed. "Cabin crew, take your jump seats immediately." Barron looked up. That wasn't in the normal script. The overhead bins jerked open, a few bags tumbling out like careless thoughts. People screamed. Barron placed his hand gently on the girl's shoulder beside him, steadying her as the plane dropped what felt like 50 feet. Everything went weightless. Then it slammed down again. Drinks hit ceilings. A phone ricocheted past his feet. A passenger yelled in Spanish from 2 rows back. But Barron remained unmoved. His heart pounded like a drum. But he wasn't afraid. He'd felt storms before. Not this kind, but others, quieter ones. Public ones. Internal ones. All storms, in their own language. At the front, Mel stood. Flight attendants snapped at him to sit down. But he didn't. He stumbled toward the curtain separating first class from coach. Each step a battle against gravity. He had to see if Barron was okay. Not just because he felt responsible, but because, inexplicably, the boy had become the center of something larger than this flight. He finally spotted him, sitting upright. Calm, eyes forward. It struck Mel in a way no role ever had. They're a year to form. Amid shaking metal and screaming passengers, Barron Trump looked like someone born not to be watched, but to lead. And in that moment, the seed of a deeper purpose was planted. The worst of the turbulence began to pass, leaving the cabin in a heavy hush. Seatbelts remained fastened, but the rattling had quieted to a distant shudder. People exhaled. One man wept into his hands. A flight attendant crouched in the aisle, helping an elderly woman pick up her oxygen tube. Amid the scattered chaos, Barron adjusted his earbuds, not to listen to anything, but to recenter himself. He felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning, he blinked in surprise. Mel Eastman, legend of the screen, face weathered by both film and life, was standing there. A hand braced on the headrest. Mind if I sit? He asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside Barron. His tone wasn't casual. It was weighted. Barron nodded quickly and shifted. Making room, Mel sat slowly, his knees brushing the tray table ahead. You and down, you all right? He asked after a moment. Barron gave a small nod. Yeah. You and mustard in Warnum. Mel exhaled. Better now. Thanks to you. He offered a faint smile. You didn't have to give me your seat. Barron shrugged. You've spent your life giving people stories. Thought you deserved a little comfort. Mel tilted his head. Not many 19-year-olds would think like that. Barron's smile was soft. I'm not most 19-year-olds. Mel studied him. No. No. You're not. They sat in silence for a minute, listening to the hum of the engines. It was the kind of silence that felt earned. Then Mel spoke again. Lower now. You ever think about legacy? Barron turned his head. Sometimes, for tonin, I try not to let it define me. Mel chuckled. That's harder than it sounds. I know. People think they know who I am, what I stand for, but they don't? Mel nodded. They never do, until you show them. That's the trick. Kid Rayer wine summer you decide the story you leave behind. Barron looked forward. I don't want mine to be about power or wealth. I want it to mean something. That's rare. Mel said, more to himself than to Barron. You're rare. The conversation drifted after that into childhoods. First mistakes, favorite books, worst regrets. The contrast between them, age, experience, fame, only made the connection more striking. Barron spoke with a quiet strength, the kind of maturity people usually gain through fire. Mel listened with an openness he hadn't felt in years. As the plane began its slow descent, Mel turned to him one last time. You ever think about writing? Barron blinked. Writing. Mel smiled. You've got the soul for it. And the eyes. Barron hesitated. I never thought anyone would care what I had to say. They will now, Mel said simply. Because you didn't just say something, you did something. The wheels touched down on the tarmac. Passengers clapped out of habit. But this time, it felt deserved. Something had shifted. Not in the skies or in them. The airport lounge was buzzing like any other evening at LAX. Business travelers hurried through, faces buried in screens, while exhausted families huddled near outlets recharging devices and themselves. But in a quieter corner, behind smoked glass and velvet ropes, Mel and Barron sat together on a low leather couch, 2 coffees cooling between them. Their flight experience had created a quiet tether between them. One neither had tried to explain. It just was. Mel held a worn leather notebook in his hand, the same one he'd pulled out on the plane. This is where I keep the bones of stories, he said, flipping through pages that looked like they'd lived through war zones. Dialogue. Ideas. Scenes that come in dreams and evaporate by breakfast. Barron leaned in, genuinely intrigued. You still write everything down. Mel smiled without looking up. Especially now. The older I get, the fewer chances I have to forget something worth remembering. He paused, then tore a blank page from the back, pushing it toward Barron. Your turn. Barron blinked. What do you want to read you? You want me to write something? Anything, Mel said. Doesn't have to be polished. Just real. Barron hesitated. He had never written for anyone before, not even really for himself. But something in Mel's expression wasn't judging, just waiting. So Barron took the pen and, after a long breath, wrote, I don't want to be famous. I just want to be seen. Truly seen. Not because of where I come from, or what name I carry, but because of what I give the world when no one's watching. Mel read the words in silence. Then again, then a third time. You know, he said, slowly folding the page and tucking it into his breast pocket. That might be the most honest sentence I've read in 20 years. Barron shrugged, a little embarrassed. I don't know if it's worth anything. It is, Mel said. And I think we should make something from it. Barron tilted his head. Like what? A movie? Not quite, at least not yet. Mel leaned back, staring at the airport ceiling like he was seeing something through it. What if we told stories that don't start with a bang, but with a breath? Stories that come from kindness, from courage, the kind that go unnoticed. Barron leaned forward, curious now. And what would we call it? Mel looked at him, eyes sharp and alive. We don't need a title yet. We just need the first chapter. A Ravinason on Tonanawanawin. And I think you already wrote it. At that moment, a group of travelers passed, whispering as they glanced over. One pointed, "Is that Mel Eastman?" Barron caught the look of recognition, but Mel didn't react. He wasn't performing now. He was dreaming, with a kid who, just days ago, was another anonymous passenger on a plane, and now might be something more. The gate speaker called the next flight. People moved. Time didn't pause for inspiration, but the spark had been lit. Mel rose and extended a hand. Come to my studio next week. Let's find out what this becomes. Barron took it, smiling. I will. As Mel turned to leave, he glanced back. You're not just someone with a name anymore. Barron, you're someone with a voice. And just like that, he was gone, swallowed by the tide of the terminal. Barron stood still for a moment, notebook in hand, heart racing. He didn't know what he'd just agreed to, but something in his chest whispered, this was only the beginning. The next Tuesday, under a thick California sun, Barron found himself standing in front of a low, nondescript building nestled in Studio City. It didn't scream legendary filmmaker from the outside, just ivy crawling over faded brick and a weathered wooden sign that read, Eastman Studios. But inside, the walls breathed history. Vintage film reels lined the hallway shelves. Framed posters of Mel's most iconic films flanked a corridor that smelled of sawdust, coffee, and nostalgia. It was like walking through someone's legacy. Barron was early. He sat in the lounge, an old screening room that Mel had converted into a creative space, picking at the corner of a legal pad, wondering if he really belonged there. Then the door creaked, and Mel walked in carrying 2 coffees and a script binder thick enough to crush doubt. So, you came, he said, handing Barron a cup. You said it was just the beginning. Barron replied with a nervous smile. Mel nodded and dropped the binder on the table. It is, but only if you're ready to work. The binder was labeled The Quiet Ones. It's a working title, Mel explained. The idea is simple. A film anthology, interconnected stories, no superheroes, no explosions, just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. No one notices until it changes everything. Barron flipped open the first page. The opening scene was unmistakably inspired by the flight. A teenage boy gives up his first-class seat to a stranger, unknowingly setting off a chain of events that ripples across lives. But the characters were different. The setting altered. And the name's fictional. You changed it, Barron said. Mel sipped his coffee. Of course, this isn't about recreating real life. It's about honoring the truth behind it. Barron nodded. So what do you want me to do? Mel leaned back, folding his arms. Co-write. Co-produce. Help me tell this thing from both sides, your voice and mine. My job is to build the bones. Yours is to give it a heartbeat. Barron was stunned. But I've never worked on a film. I've never even told a story this big. You already have. Mel said, the moment you stood up on that plane, you wrote something more powerful than half the scripts in Hollywood. You just didn't know it. Barron looked down at the binder again, flipping slowly through pages of scenes, some half-written, others scribbled with notes in Mel's tight, messy handwriting. He saw a line scrawled in red ink. Kindness is never loud, but it's always remembered. He took a breath. All right. Let's do it. Mel smiled. Dearest Goodman, we start today. And so they did. For hours. They worked side by side, plotting arcs, writing dialogue, challenging each other's ideas. Barron asked questions. Lots of them. But Mel never lost patience. He shared techniques, storytelling tricks, even mistakes he'd made early in his career. They brainstormed character names, story beats, and the emotional through lines that would bind it all together. What struck Barron most wasn't how fast they moved, but how personal Mel made it. This wasn't just another project for him. It was a tribute to something deeper, the quiet moments in life that shape who we become. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon and the room dimmed to amber, they had outlined the first three stories. Barron leaned back, exhausted but energized. I don't know how we're going to tell all this in one film, Mel smirked. Maybe we're not. Barron raised a brow. What do you mean? Mel closed the binder. Maybe this isn't just a film. Maybe it's a message. And for the first time in a long time, Barron felt like he wasn't chasing purpose. He was building it. Over the next few weeks, the studio became their second home. Mornings bled into nights, and the script pages multiplied like ivy, growing wild, curling into unexpected corners, and revealing roots neither of them knew they had. Mel worked with the precision of a craftsman. Barron brought raw instinct and a surprisingly strong eye for character development. They weren't just collaborators. They were co-architects of something that was quickly becoming larger than either of them had envisioned. Casting calls went out. Emails flooded in from agents and managers who'd caught wind of the Quiet Ones and wanted their clients attached. Mel sifted through the hype with the calm of a man who'd been here 1,000 times. But it was Barron who spotted a little-known stage actor from Chicago for one of the lead roles. The actor's audition, a quiet monologue about helping a stranger in a grocery store, left everyone in the room silent. Mel glanced at Barron and simply nodded. You've got the eye, kid. Production meetings turned intense, yet never tense. They debated tone, camera angles, lighting choices. Barron gravitated toward natural light and documentary-style realism. Mel pushed back with warmth and color palettes that would quietly cue emotion. Somehow, they always found middle ground. Each scene became a canvas, each decision intentional. There were no explosions, no green screens, just real moments, told with care. As production began, the set buzzed with energy, but also something else, purpose. The cast and crew knew this wasn't a blockbuster, it was a message. One that spoke softly but powerfully. Between takes, actors shared their own stories. A camera assistant recounted how her father once paid a stranger's hospital bill. A lighting tech broke down, talking about a teacher who saved him from homelessness. It became clear that The Quiet Ones was echoing something universal, something long buried beneath noise and cynicism. One afternoon, while reviewing footage, Mel turned to Barron. You know, I've directed scenes with presidents and played poker with legends. But this is the first time I felt like I'm building something that might actually outlive me. Barron didn't know what to say. He just nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle in. The shoot wrapped in late spring. On the final day, the crew gathered for one last shot, a close-up of an elderly woman handing a handwritten letter to a stranger on a park bench. The camera slowly panned away, revealing a ripple of subtle kindness spreading across the scene. Someone picking up trash, another returning a dropped wallet. No words, just connection. When the director called cut, the set went silent. Spontaneous applause broke out, not wild, not forced, just a quiet chorus of people who had felt something. That night, under soft studio lights and takeout containers, Mel handed Barron a small leather notebook. This was my first idea book. I've carried it for 40 years. Barron opened it slowly. Pages yellowed and filled with story fragments and thoughts. On the last page, in fresh ink, was one line. Stories don't change the world, but they change people. And people change the world. Barron looked up, overwhelmed. You sure you want me to have this? Mel smiled. You've already earned it. And in that moment, Barron realized they hadn't just made a film. They had created a movement. The premiere of The Quiet Ones was held in a modest independent theater in Santa Monica. Intimate, tasteful, and deliberately removed from the red carpet circus of Hollywood. Mel insisted. If the story is quiet, the opening should be two. He'd said in Medina Wasser, Shunan. Barron agreed. This wasn't about flashing cameras or ego. It was about the message, about people. Invitations had gone out to family, friends, cast, crew, and a handful of journalists who had followed the film's quiet rise with curiosity. As Barron arrived at the venue that night, dressed in a simple navy suit and tie, He felt different from the boy who had boarded that flight months ago. He wasn't a politician's son tonight. He was a storyteller. Mel greeted him at the entrance with a smirk. "You ready for your world to shift a little?" "I think it already has," Barron replied. Inside, the lights dimmed. The opening scene, a father folding laundry while listening to a voicemail from his estranged daughter, brought immediate stillness to the room. No music, no sweeping shots, just raw, unflinching humanity. And it didn't let go. Scene after scene unfolded like emotional mosaics. A widow leaving a birthday card on her late husband's grave. A teen anonymously fixing his neighbor's broken fence. A teacher giving her last paycheck to a struggling student. All small moments, all life-altering. As the final frame faded to black, the room was suspended in silence. Then applause. Not thunderous, not forced, deep, sustained. Earnest perseverance. Mel stood, giving a brief nod, then pulled Barron up beside him. "Ladies and gentlemen, he said into the microphone. This young man didn't just co-create this film, he inspired it. He reminded me, and maybe all of us, why storytelling matters. Why small still matters." Barron stepped up, hesitant at first, but something in the moment carried him forward. "I never expected a simple act on a plane to lead here," he began, his voice steady. "But I've learned that kindness isn't something we save for grand gestures. It lives in the quiet. And if we listen, if we pay attention, we might realize that those quiet moments echo the loudest." After the premiere, people lingered. Strangers embraced. Tears were wiped away discreetly. Reporters asked thoughtful questions, not about celebrity, but about intent, meaning, and change. By midnight, social media was awash with praise, not from influencers, but from everyday people. Teachers, parents, students who are a single father in Ohio posted a photo of himself and his daughter with the caption, "Watched the quiet ones tonight. Called my mom after 14 years. She cried. I cried. Thank you. Barron." Within 48 hours, the hashtag #BeQuietlyKind was trending worldwide. But perhaps the most unexpected message came 2 days later. Barron was at home, staring at the city lights outside his apartment, when his phone buzzed with a call from a restricted number. A familiar voice came through the line, steady, strong, deep. "Barron, Nosterminamund. It's Clint." Barron straightened in his chair. "Clint. It's good to hear from you. I saw the film," Clint said. "I sat through every frame. And you know what? You nailed it. You didn't just carry the heart of that flight into a story. You made it into something people will carry with them long after the credits roll." Barron didn't know what to say. "You up for one more story?" Clint asked. Barron smiled. "Always a one." And in that moment, the next chapter quietly began. Months had passed since the premiere of The Quiet Ones, but its echo showed no signs of fading. The film didn't just perform well, it moved people. Schools added it to empathy curriculums. Hospitals screened it in waiting rooms. Families used scenes from it as conversation starters around dinner tables. What had started with a middle seat gesture on a flight had become something far larger, something alive. Barron was invited to speak at a university in Chicago, not as a celebrity, not as a Trump, but as a filmmaker. "We don't want politics," the dean had told him. "We want perspective. The kind that reminds us stories still matter." Standing before a room of film students, Barron remembered the boy who once watched the world from the sidelines. That version of himself felt distant now, but not gone. "When I gave up my seat, I didn't know anyone was watching. It'll be one in me," he told them. Turns out, someone always is, not for fame, but for the impact of what you do when you think no one will notice. He stayed late that night, answering every question. One student waited till the end and handed him a small note. It read, "My brother and I hadn't spoken in 5 years. We watched your movie. I called him after. We're meeting next week. Thank you." Barron folded the note carefully, slipping it into the same pocket where he still kept the letter from the fellow traveler on the plane. Meanwhile, Clint and Mel had quietly begun working together on another script. Something reflective, gentle, centered on the power of generational wisdom. And this time, they asked Barron to co-write. Think of it as passing the torch, Clint said one afternoon at a quiet cafe in Monterey, his eyes crinkling with a familiar glint. "But with you." I think the flame's already lit. As the seasons changed, so did Barron's sense of purpose. He launched a nonprofit called The First Seat, an organization designed to promote kindness through youth storytelling programs. Kids from underprivileged communities were taught how to write, free minds, a film, and share their own stories. The motto was simple: start small, sit first, make room, and the movement grew. 1 year to the day after that flight, Barron boarded a plane again, same airline, same route. Same seat, 1A. But this time, he didn't stay in it for long. An older woman, clearly flustered and holding her boarding pass for a back row seat, stood beside him. Barron looked up, smiled, and stood. Please. Good ways, he said, stepping aside. Take mine. She blinked, surprised. Are you sure? I'm certain. As Barron settled into the middle seat at the back of the plane, next to a wide-eyed teenager and a drowsy business traveler, he popped in his headphones, leaned back, and smiled to himself. Because he knew now, stories don't end when the credits roll. They begin again. Every time someone chooses to be kind when they don't have to. Every time someone gives up a little comfort for someone else. Every time someone sees a moment, not as ordinary, but as an opportunity, and somewhere above the clouds, among the steady hum of engines and rustle of in-flight magazines, another ripple was beginning. One that might just change everything.